Yeah, tonight's a little touchy subject. I've touched on it before. I've brought it up, but I've never made it the exact subject of the sermon. I've brought out certain parts in different things that I've said and in different sermons, and so you all know where I stand on those issues. But really, the sermon title tonight really is just sexual purity, maintaining it, or discovering it if you've already failed. And you're going to know why that is here in a minute, and here in a little bit, why I really have a heart to see this spoken tonight. In 1 Corinthians 6:13, Paul says to the Corinthians, "Food is meant for the stomach, and the stomach for food, and God will destroy both one and the other. The body is not meant for sexual immorality, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. And God raised the Lord, and the Lord will also raise us up by His power. Do you not know that your bodies are members of Christ? Shall I then take the members of Christ and make them members of a prostitute? Never. Or do you not know that he who is joined to a prostitute becomes one body with her? For as it is written, the two will become one flesh. But he who is joined to the Lord becomes one spirit with Him. Flee from sexual immorality. Every other sin a person commits is outside the body, but the sexually immoral person sins against his own body. Or do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have from God? You are not your own, for you were bought with a price. So glorify God in your body." There's a word that I used earlier, purity. That word scares a lot of people, and it scares people in different ways. Some people are scared that they won't be able to stay pure. Some people are scared that they'll have to stay pure. And there's many of those running around. There's many of you sitting in this room even tonight. You're either scared that you won't be able to, or you're scared that you'll have to. Some people are afraid because they haven't stayed pure, but knew they should have. Some people knew that they crossed lines they never should have crossed, and they stepped over boundaries that never should have been stepped over. But the reality is you and I, and all of us live in a culture that doesn't like the idea of purity.
It's true.
It doesn't like the idea of things being the way they are supposed to be according to the will of God. It doesn't like the idea of sex being kept for marriage. And so it flaunts sexuality in our faces, and yet that's what God requires of us. Music, movies, TV, media, all those different kinds of things flaunt, even in the slightest, a hint at some of the things that are ungodly in the sexual realm. And just a perfect example, listen, I'm one of those guys that likes music, and if it's got a good beat, I like it, okay? I don't even really pay attention to lyrics sometimes, okay? I was raised to listen to nothing but Christian music, and that's really all I stick to anymore. But there's some music out there that maybe you like the rhythm, and maybe you like the beat, and you sing the lyrics all the time, but you don't realize the connotation, or maybe you do, but you just don't care because it's really good music. And I think there's this song, and you're probably going to laugh at me a little bit, there's this song that people like to put on TikTok and take it out of connotation, and it says something along the lines of, "Baby, turn the lights off," or what is it? Close the door, lock the door, and turn the lights down low. And some people try and take that out of context and make funny videos about it and make jokes about other things regarding. But you understand, I heard that song playing on the bus the other day. I'm on a school bus, and somebody had their little jug-looking thing that plays music, and that was a song that came on, and you think, wow, these kids are listening to this. 6th and 7th grade kids are listening to this, and maybe they know what it means, but they really don't care because, I'll be honest with you, I think the song has a great beat. I think it has a great rhythm, right? But at what expense, right? At what expense do we listen to that music? Because that's what gets in our heads, regardless of beat. There was a great song, I shouldn't say a great song, it was actually an awful song. It was written, there was an atheistic song that somebody introduced to me a couple years ago and just wanted me to listen so I could tear it apart for them so they knew they were okay. And I listened to it, and I'll just tell you, I mean, it had some good beat to it, and if it was a Christian, if it wasn't so blatant and vulgar, I probably would have listened to it a lot because it had such a great beat. But what was in it could affect what I believe and think about things, because really, you remember more of what we sing than what we say. And so many of you walk away from church, you aren't saying what I said, and you aren't remembering what I said, but you're remembering what you sang in the songs. And a lot of us can memorize a song before we ever memorize a verse of the Bible. And so the reality is that if we're memorizing those things, remember, one of the important things that we're to do with the Word is to meditate on it and to put it in our hearts and in our minds. And if it's in there, we can live by it. But if it's not and something else is in there, we'll live by what we've heard. And so I want you to understand that what is in your life, those things in culture that say this is okay, this is all right, simply because, not because they're out there saying this is okay, but simply because they are in our presence, you have to be careful with. Very familiar passage you've heard before. Matthew 5:27, Jesus said on the Sermon on the Mount, he said, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body be thrown into hell." God's standard of purity is very high. He set the bar right there. See, in the Old Testament, what it was is, don't lay with another man if you're a guy. Don't have sex outside of it. All these different rules about what not to do sexually. And Jesus comes in, and some people would like to say that he lowered the standard. And you'll see a lot of that. A lot of people say there's grace, and then you don't have to, it's just it's all covered, and you can just act however you want. But Jesus raised the standard higher. He said if you even look at a woman to lust at her, or if you even look at a guy to lust after him in a sexual way, then you just committed a sin. So Jesus himself said that. But really, don't even look at someone? Wow. How is it possible to stay pure by God's standard when culture throws awful images at us day by day, right? I think the average age to see pornography is like 9 to 11 for, I believe, boys, and it might be older for girls, like 11 to 13 for girls, according to multiple research platforms. But that's when most kids are exposed to pornography, or even some snippet of it, an idea of what it is. You can access Pornhub for free. Right? I mean, it's so accessible to us today. You find these avenues, and you can wipe your history clean on your iPhone or your computer, and nobody ever knows. Except for, it's in the cloud, it's in somewhere, but the reality is it's hard to track that down. Nobody's going to go to that much work. And so you can do whatever you want. You can look at these images day by day, and it's of no help. See, tonight I'm not just talking about purity in not having sex before marriage, because that's not where you draw the line for purity. Jesus drew it a lot higher. He said there's a higher standard that you have to live by, not even look at a woman, not even look at a man. And if that's what you do, then get out of your life what is causing you to do that. See, this goes as far as simple as just simple lust, right? Looking at somebody to think about them. You'll know. You can say, well, I don't know what that really looks like. You know if you're looking at somebody because you want to see something or want to think something. It goes to pornography, masturbation, which can happen, girls and guys. Sending pictures, asking for pictures. Seems like a very minor thing. Sexting. Maybe you don't even send a picture. Maybe you just talk about it. Seem like very minor things, but you've already crossed that boundary, crossed that line of purity that you weren't supposed to cross. And you know what the reality is I don't even know if all the statistics are true. I think that most of the numbers would probably be higher. I read a book one time. It was by a Christian youth pastor, and he said that 98% of men admit to masturbating, and the other 2% are more than likely lying. And that was a research. Obviously you can't. It's statistical, right? We can't fully know the accuracy of that. But that seemed like a pretty intense way of looking at it, because the reality is in our culture, how could you not, right? How could you not do those things? And yet God provides a way. Psalms 119:9 says, "How can a young man," and I say, or woman, "keep his or her way pure? By guarding it according to your word." God's word has every answer on staying pure. God's word has every answer on discovering purity when you've already failed. When you've already fallen into that trap. Jesus himself said it. Whatever is causing you to fail sexually, and this really goes for any kind of sin, because he said if it's causing you to sin, cast it out of your life.
Yes.
That might be the music you listen to. We really do not, and I'll say it again and again tonight about music, we really do not realize how much music affects what we think. We really don't realize how much those lyrics that we sing get into our head, and that's what convinces us life ought to be. It might be the movies you watch. It might be the device you have. I really don't think that deleting an app does much for you, because you can just download it right back. Unless you put some sort of security on your phone, which I've done before personally for myself for different reasons. But the reality is sometimes you just have to get rid of the device you have. Whatever it is, Jesus went to the extreme. Nobody's out here. We don't have a bunch of one-eyed Christians. And almost every Christian out there, their eye has caused them to sin, or their arm has caused them to sin. And you don't see a bunch of one-armed, one-eyed Christians walking around. Because Jesus was using a hyperbole. He was using exaggeration. But the reality is he's saying, as painful as it may be to take this out of your life, it's got to go, because it's better for you to enter into heaven maimed or without something than to enter into hell with everything. I'll say it again. Culture has saturated you, young people, with sex. I grew up with it because I'm not much older than many of you. I'm not even a year older than some of you. It's commonplace in jokes. It's commonplace in media, music, everyday life. There's no question as to why there's pressure to engage in it. There's no question as to why there's pressure to engage in it. And it's not just that. It's just the reality that sometimes everybody else has done it. And you're the only one. If we would look at sex as the sacred union that God's called it to be. Remember what I read earlier at the beginning? The two will become one flesh. You know, some people say if you have sex before marriage with somebody, you're not going to marry, then you have given away a piece of yourself. Well, I'm not entirely sure that's true. I think you've given your whole self away. Because he says you become one. You become one with that person. You've given your whole self away. Your whole being away to that person. That's how sacred sex is between a man and a woman. There's one thing prostitutes won't do with the people that they prostitute with, and that's kiss them. Why? Because kissing is considered very intimate. And they don't want the intimacy, even though sex is an intimate act, they don't like the intimacy of kissing because they recognize that that's a very intimate act that was designed by God. But us teenagers consider that the most tame thing to do. There's a sacredness to sex because it's a union with another person. That's why it's so special to do it with the person who you have married. That's why it's so special to do it with the person that you're called to be with once you have joined in that union of marriage, because you're giving your entire self away to another person, and it's not very easy to get that back. Okay? If we would recognize the sacredness of this union, the sacredness of this joining, maybe we'd realize the need not to do it. Because so many people have given themselves away for pleasure and for fun, and that's not even the purpose. You realize that, that's not even the purpose of sex. It's not to have a good feeling flow through your body. Have a good little time. It's about the intimacy, because it is a representation of the intimacy that we as the bride of Christ have with the Father. Jesus. As we will be joined with Him one day. See, it also said, where it said it, it says, he who is joined to the Lord becomes one spirit with Him in the same way. So he's saying in the same way that we can be joined to the Lord is, to one extent, an emotional way, you can be joined to the person that you have sex with, and in a physical way, and in a mental way. You be joined to them and you're one. See, there's a lot of prostitutes walking around that are more than one person. Really. And they're multiple people. They're hundreds of people. They don't even know who the person they are is. Because someone shared in that with them. Because it was all fun and games. And it's not a game, it is a very serious thing. It's a very serious thing that we take sex seriously. That we take things like pornography and masturbation seriously. Even though it's in culture and it's saturated your life and it's saturated everything you see and hear anymore nowadays, and it's so easily accessible, you get on social media and an ad pops up and you had no intention of looking at it, but it's there. And most of you also, like I said earlier, have this knowledge that most everybody around you is doing. And you can't stand here and convince me it's not an epidemic in Cumberland County. Because I was only in high school a couple years ago. And you can't stand up here and convince me it's not a problem in any school in this nation, especially when the statistics are so high. It is a problem. It is an epidemic. It is a thing that students are engaging in this. But you know what? I'm not going to sit here and say it's not your fault, but sometimes they don't know any better. Yes, children as old as 14, 15, 16, all they've seen in their life, all they've seen pushed to them, all they've seen thrown out to them in their everyday life is some form of sexuality or sensuality. And it may simply be from their friends. Dave said something to me earlier that kind of hit me, and I hadn't thought of it before tonight. He said, how many people will try and get you to do what they are ashamed they have done? See, there's a lot of you walking around with shame because of maybe what you've done. with somebody recently that shared me their story, and I've never been so devastated. You were on to me. You thought you had me. No, it's not. No. But I had a student talk with me recently about some things that had happened in the past regarding sexuality, and I'd never seen someone so broken. Because some people, they've done it, and maybe they feel a little shame, but the next time they're asked to do it, the next time they're pressured, they fall right back into the same trap because they don't know what to do. I'd never seen somebody so shamed and somebody so ashamed and somebody so distraught at the thing that they had done and sorrowful and grieved at how sinful they had been or how they had fallen under pressure because someone wanted to use them. And I began to feel in that moment, for young people in a way I've never really felt before. To have a heart to say, stay pure. Because it does affect you, and it will affect you negatively. And it will hurt you. It'll hurt your future relationships. It can hurt everything that goes on in your life. It can skew any relationship, whether it be with a girlfriend or boyfriend in the future, or the one you have then when you commit that act, or with family members, parents, brothers, siblings, any of that kind of stuff, your children in the future. How does it affect that? See, if you've ever heard of Dante's Inferno, is that what it is? Where they talk about the different layers of hell, and the coldest, they say that, this is old stuff, they say that the deepest part of hell is the coldest and it's freezing, and that people that go there are the ones that commit, what kind of sins? The sins against other people, right? So like murder and, hatred against other people and like stealing and that kind of stuff. And they say that the people that commit sexual sins are on the outer part because really you've only sinned against yourself, but that's not true. That's not true by any means. You've sinned against so many people when you commit that act. You've sinned against yourself. You've sinned against the Lord. You've sinned against the person that you committed it with. Once again, it skews relationships. It breaks things apart because there is an emotional and mental aspect to it that you can't really get back. Not easily, at least. See, I read an article on pornography and how it affects the brain, and they say it actually literally rewires your brain when you are addicted to pornography. I also read something a few years ago that I shared with youth probably a year ago, where it said that there was a study done of brains of men who were addicted to pornography and the brains of men who were not, and the brains of men who were addicted to pornography had literally holes in them. Literally had holes in their brain because it was eating away. See, they thought for a while that your brain was a mass that stayed the way it was, right? Your eyes are, your legs are, your arms are, your heart stays the same your whole life, but your brain can be made different. It can be rewired. Its shaping can be shifted by what you put into it. A lot of guys walking around with holes in their brain. A lot of girls too. I want you to know the weight of those things. I want you to know the weight of giving yourself away before your time. I want you to know the weight of what it means to do something as simple as masturbate. At least it looks simple compared to real sex, right? I mean, there's plenty of you maybe walking around that are virgins, but it doesn't mean you haven't crossed the line. Once again, it could be something like sending a picture or asking for one. And you've never been with a person intimately in that way, but you've already crossed the line of purity that you weren't supposed to cross, you weren't supposed to step into. But look, I can stand up here and tell you to be pure. I can stand up here and tell you, don't do it. I can stand up here and tell you it's not worth it. But you know what? That doesn't help a thing, does it? Because the pressure is on you every single day, everywhere you go. It permeates those school hallways because that's what everybody around you is doing. You're so used to it. And every time, especially I think of young girls that get pressured into it by their boyfriend, and they have to have 100 questions flowing into their mind. Well, maybe my family's been in this kind of situation. I don't know any better. Or maybe my mom or dad has engaged in that way. I don't know any better. Or, you know what, everybody else is doing. I don't know any better. I'm afraid for what he might do to me or say about me if I don't do what he's asking me to do. And the same could go for guys. I'm sure some of us just maybe hide a little better. But those questions start flooding into your mind, and so what? You give yourself away. Because there's so many voices saying, do it, when in reality there's really only one voice saying, don't. And that's the voice of God. And if we would learn to listen to the one, all those other voices wouldn't matter. But some of you have been in that place before. Some of you have engaged in things before. Yes, it might have been sexting, sending pictures, asking for them, masturbation, pornography, actual sex, oral, whatever. Any of that. You might have paid for something. I'm not going to stand up here and tell you it's not your fault, because some of you knew when you did it you shouldn't have. It's just the truth. Some of you knew. Some of you knew when you took that step you shouldn't have. There's things I've done I know I shouldn't have. But my heart was open to some things recently. My mind was open to some things recently that I hadn't really taken a look at. I really hadn't conceived in my mind and understood the pain that you might take with you because of what you've already done. The frustration, the anger, the hatred. I had someone tell me something one time, a long time ago, that they were so distraught by the sin that of sexuality that they had committed that they didn't know what to do because they felt so beat down, because they go to church all the time and they hear about staying pure, but nobody really ever teaches them what to do when they haven't. So they began to cut. And man, when that person told me that, when that student told me that, it's like a shocker, because I know drugs are a problem. I know alcohol is a problem. I know sex is a problem. I know that to some extent suicide is a problem, or depression. But man, when they said cutting, I thought, man, I haven't heard that one in a long time. But to think that some people are so distraught by what they've done, are so beat down by what they've done, that's the method they would resort to because they don't know any better way out, because they're young and they don't understand. They don't know why somebody can stand up here every week and say, be pure, be pure, be pure, and yet what are they to do if they haven't been? And all there is guilt and shame and anger. But 1 Corinthians 7:9 says, Paul was talking to the Corinthians, if you remember in 1 Corinthians, he actually calls out a guy in the church who was having sex with his stepmom, which is pretty problematic. And in the second letter, he says, as it is, I rejoice not because you were grieved, but because you were grieved into repenting. For you felt a godly grief, so that you suffered no loss through us. For godly grief produces a repentance that leads to salvation without regret, whereas worldly grief produces death. For see what earnestness this godly grief has produced in you, but also what eagerness to clear yourselves, what indignation, what fear, what longing, what zeal, what punishment. At every point you have proved yourselves innocent in the matter. And what Paul's saying in that verse is he's saying, okay, God's not a God of guilt. He's not a God of condemnation. He doesn't point his finger in your face and say you're worthless and treat you wrong because of what you did. But he's saying there is a point where we have to have this godly sorrow that leads us to repentance, leads us to turn away from what we've done and recognize that we need to go and move on and have no regrets.
Yes.
Because we're free by his power. See, there's a story, and I've told it so many times up here, and you probably know it tongue-in-cheek by now. I know Landon can stand up here and tell the story without me. David and Bathsheba, you've heard that story. You know, David is, you know the story. David is walking out on his roof one day. Well, not on his roof. He's walking out on the king's palace. When he's supposed to be at war, he slept in till late that afternoon. He walks up on his palace and he sees somebody bathing on the roof. Listen, I don't know if that was the thing to do back then. I'm thankful nobody does it today. But this lady was bathing on her roof, okay? And he could see her, okay? And he was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. And you know what he did? Long story short, he calls her to him, has sex with her, has a relationship with her. Her husband's at war, so he calls that her husband be put on the front line so that he'll be killed first so that he can be for sure set in this relationship with this woman because that's what he wants. Matter of fact, his first child with that woman died because of the sin he committed with her. But imagine how she felt. Imagine the pressure she had on her. It's the king, right? You either say yes or you die. I mean, that's really all there is to it. If she said, no, king, I won't do this to it, it'd either be forced upon her or she'd be killed. Now, I don't think anybody in here has ever been in that situation. But I know you've been in something similar where you were too fearful to say no. You didn't know how to control your urges. That's more especially for the guys. You didn't know how to say no to your urges. For girls, I think the problem is saying no to the guy. For the guys, it's saying no to yourself. A lot of times. Not every time, but a lot of times. But in this story, if you remember, what happens later is that Nathan the prophet comes to David and tells him a story about a man that stole some sheep from another guy. And David is upset and he's angry at this guy for taking the sheep from this other person. And then Nathan says, King David, that's you. You know, you stole the woman, you stole Bathsheba from her husband. You stole Bathsheba from who she was united with at one point. And you know what? David, he mourned. And he wept. And he felt bad about what he did. But see, he repented. And you know what it was? It wasn't that he felt guilty. It wasn't that he felt condemned by God and like it was all over. But he had this godly sorrow that Paul talks about that says, I have sinned against the Lord and I want to turn from my ways. I don't want to do this anymore. He didn't feel worthless. He didn't feel hopeless. He knew there was hope in the Lord. And that's where he found his hope. And that's where he repented in. He was grieved, but it was a godly grief. See, some of you are sitting in here tonight, and I'm telling you, I don't know maybe what you've felt. I don't know maybe what you've gone through since you've made that mistake sexually. Something as little as you may see it, as masturbation, as pornography, as asking for a picture, sending one, just looking at a person, or actually engaging in those acts in some form. And you feel guilt and you feel shame about it and you don't know what to do because it's messed up your relationships. It's messed up maybe your family. It's messed up all kinds of things in your life. Maybe you look fine on the outside everywhere you go, but you're not on the inside because you still hold on to the guilt and the weight of what you've done. I want to tell you another story. In John chapter 8, you probably know this story. Early in the morning, Jesus came again to the temple, and all the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery. And placing her in the midst, they said to him, Teacher, this woman's been caught in the act of adultery. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. So what do you say? This they said to test him, that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. And as they continued to ask him, he stood up and said to them, Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her. And once more he bent down and wrote on the ground. But when they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the older ones. And Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus stood up and said to her, Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you? She said, No one, Lord. And Jesus said, Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on sin no more. So I don't want you to feel left out if you've never committed a sin sexually. Although most of you probably have. And I'm not saying that to be rude or mean, but it's just reality. Statistics are true. I can't stand in this room and believe it. At least not a portion of you have or haven't. But some of you are holding on to the guilt and the weight. I can't imagine what that woman felt when everyone is surrounding her, ready to kill her for a simple act. Well, I shouldn't say simple act, but for an act she committed with another man outside of marriage. I can't imagine what she felt walking out there thinking, this is the end of my life just because I made one simple mistake. And some of you have maybe felt that same way before because of one thing you did and how it skewed your relationships and how it messed up with your mind and how it messed with everything going on up here and in your heart. And maybe it messed up your relationship with the Lord and you didn't know where to go from there. But I want you to know tonight, if you have not kept sexually pure up to this point in your life, if you have not stayed pure up to this point, God is not throwing stones at you. God is not throwing stones at you. He doesn't hate you for it. He doesn't condemn you for it. He doesn't look down on you for it. He's grieved by it for you. He may be hurt by it for you. But he's not throwing stones at you. He's not ready for the end. He's not ready for your end. You know what? And if Jesus is any example of how to respond to this sin, I'm not going to throw stones either. None of us should. But I want you to understand one thing tonight. And this is really where my heart is tonight, especially for those of you that have maybe fallen into that trap. Maybe you've given yourself away in some way sexually. And I really believe that when you give yourself to somebody sexually, you're giving your whole self. I guess maybe you could say in masturbation and pornography, you're giving a piece of yourself away, but nonetheless, you are truly giving yourself away to something that's going to wreck your life. That you have. And some of you, like I said earlier, you've done it, and you were grieved by it, and you were upset by it, but if you were pushed to do it again, you'd fall into the same trap because you don't know how to get out. And you don't know how to be released from that urge, from that temptation, from that sin, maybe to be released from that pressure. You don't know how to step into the freedom that God has for you. So you fall into that trap again. I really believe that's where most young girls are at. Because there's a lot of young girls out there that I know didn't want to do it the first time, but they did it the first time, so they might as well do it again. I've already messed it up, right? How can I mess it up any further? I didn't wait till marriage the first time, so why now? But I want to tell you tonight, God can wipe that sin away like it never happened. God can take all of that away. Any guilt, any shame, any fear, any anger, hatred, depression over anything you've done before in that regards, that sin maybe in the sexual sense that you have committed, God can take all that away. As if it never happened. Wipe your slate clean. Right? He cast it into the sea of forgetfulness. He truly can provide that freedom. He truly can provide that salvation in such a way that you say, okay, no more. See, what did he say to the lady? He didn't say, you know what, I don't condemn you, and so keep on living the way you keep living. He said, go and sin no more. This is your chance to make things right now. Yeah. This is your chance to go forward and never do it again, because you've received mercy now. I'm sure if later on down the line Jesus came across her and she was continuing to do it, I'm sure he would have said something then about, you need to deal with this, and what's wrong with you, what's going on. But right here he says, this is your chance, go and sin no more. I haven't condemned you. I haven't hurt you. It's wiped clean. It's like it never happened. And if you'll receive the forgiveness of God, it's like it never happened. Will you ever be a virgin again? No, because that's physically impossible. But spiritually, it's as if it never happened, because I believe, and I've heard it said all my life, and I've heard it from many people, if you have sex with somebody outside of marriage, I mean, as something as intimate as oral, or maybe even something as simple as kissing, and you go that far with somebody and you've given a piece or your whole self away to that person, that it's going to affect the relationship you have with your husband or wife in the future in a negative way. But it doesn't have to. It doesn't have to if you'll receive the forgiveness of the Lord. It doesn't have to if you'll receive the freedom He has for you. And when He comes to you and says, I'm not throwing stones at you, I'm not condemning you, go and sin no more, if you'll do what He says. See, that's faith in the Lord right there. And I believe that tonight He's looking at some of you and He's saying, I'm not throwing stones at you. Go and sin no more. I don't condemn you. Go and sin no more. The fight is real in our society. The fight is real in our culture. The fight is real in our churches even, against this sexual impurity that has attacked who we are as individuals. Because that's really what it's about. When you give yourself away, sex, it's about who you are. It takes away your identity. God can give you that identity right back. He can give you an identity in Christ as if it never happened before. See, I really believe there's some in this room that need to have that freedom tonight. Maybe you're reeling from guilt, or maybe you're not, but you haven't found the freedom of God yet, because if you were pressured tomorrow to do the same thing, you'd fall into the trap again. Something like masturbation or pornography, or maybe it's somebody pressuring you to do it then. What I want to do tonight, and this is why the parents are here. What I want to do tonight is, if Luke and Dave would come up, get to your respective sides. I know not everybody's parent is here, and it's okay. I've got some other adults on standby. Every student in this room has to make a choice tonight. It's one or the other. It's maybe not going to be easy. But every student in the seats, I'm asking you to come up to one of these two guys. Okay? On this side where Luke is. Luke's going to pray for you if you've never fallen into that trap. If you've never fallen into sexual sin. If you've never masturbated, never looked at pornography, never sent a picture, asked for one, sexted, had intercourse, any of that kind of thing, if you've never done any of those things, if you haven't fallen into that trap, you're going to come to the side with Luke, and he's going to lead a prayer for you.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
I was 15 years old when I started having sex. And for the next 12 years, it dominated my life. It changed everything. It changed my career. It changed my education. It changed my plans. It changed everything about me. And when I met Debbie, I was scared that it would change her. But when I gave my heart to the Lord, He made me new. And I didn't have to carry any of that into our relationship. Never have, don't have to. Because Jesus makes you new. He makes all things right. So we do not have to be the sum total of our mistakes. He gives us His righteousness in place of our mistakes. And we can be holy because He said we can be. That's just the truth of it.
And so what Dave's going to do is, as he has been there before and made those mistakes as a young person, and then found the freedom in Christ that you can have, he's going to stand in on this side, and if you come to him, it's because you've made that mistake before. And I'm serious when I say, I'm not just talking about having sex. I mean, Jesus set the standard pretty high. He said, don't even look at a woman. Don't even look at a woman or you've crossed that line. You've crossed that boundary. So I'm going to say, like I said earlier, you've masturbated over somebody more than once, whatever. Pornography. You've asked for something to somebody. You've even teased the idea of something with somebody. You've hinted at it because that's what you wanted. Or say, you had sexual intercourse. You did something you shouldn't have done. Any of those kinds of things. If you know if you've been impure. You know. And if you have, you're going to come to this side with Dave. Okay? I'm leaving you with a choice tonight. It's one or the other. Now some of you, your parents are here. It might be hard to stand up and admit that in front of them that you're coming to this side because you've done something wrong. I get that. I didn't like the idea when God told me to invite the parents. I thought, some kids may not even come. Some kids aren't going to want to stand up and be honest in front of their parents. But I'm trusting that you all will be. One thing we've never had a problem up here with, at any time in the past with youth group, is we've never had a trouble with honesty at the altar. I've never had to stand up and say, you should be up here. I've never had to say, you're lying. You students have always been honest with me as you've come up to the altar. We've talked about some pretty deep, cutting, harsh stuff, and you've always come up when you know it's you. And now I'm just asking you to do it in front of your parents, in front of other adults that know you, in front of other people that know you.
So they can be strong with you. So they can be strong for you. Because that's all they want to be. Is the best for you they know how to be.
It takes more than one. So, what I'm going to ask you to do, I'm going to have the students do this first, okay? Once again, that means every young person here, 6th grade through 12th grade, okay? Now's your time. I'm going to turn off some soft music here in a minute as we begin to pray. But now's your chance to stand up and pick your side. Okay? Go ahead. If you've been sexually impure, if you've done things that you never should have done with somebody, I'm asking you to come to this side and stand with Dave, and he's going to lead a prayer for you. And if you've stayed pure, if you haven't done anything up to this point, you're coming on this side with Luke. Every young person should be on one side or the other. I'm not letting you leave here without one or the other tonight. Okay? I feel like I have to cover every single one of you. You all crowd in around him. Face him. Crowd in around him, or whoever it is. If you've stayed pure, you're on this side. If you haven't, you're on the other side. Every young person. Yeah, we'll be up here until everybody, because I'm here for you young people tonight, okay? Really, it's one or the other. Like, if you're up here, whether you're a Christian or not, whether you come to church or not, you're one or the other, and that's all you're saying tonight, okay? You're just picking that side. Now, what I want the parents to do, now, I know not every parent, not every student has a parent here, okay? I want you to find your child, okay? I want you to find your child on whichever side of the spectrum they are on. and I want you to stand
spiritual
behind them.
virginity.
Okay? And if there's another child around you that doesn't have a parent with them, if you would place your hands on them and pray for them as Dave leads in prayer and as Luke leads in prayer. Okay? So I want you to find your student. I want you to find your child. Get behind them. Begin to pray for them. I'm going to turn on some soft music, and from here we're going to go elsewhere. I'm going to let you pray alone with your student here in a little bit. But I want you to stand behind them. I want you to get behind them and begin to pray for them.
Because it's renewal. He resets the whole